we're ready to go into our studies today. We have a lot of brief text to discuss, so I want to move through them. A few things happening. One, as I said, I want to talk a little bit about the so-called arc-psychological dimensions. And remember, this is one of the foundational ways that we look at the text. There's a general path that we're on that's called the inner Torah, which is connected to the inner life, Chaim HaPnimiim, and HaTorah HaPnimi. So sometimes when I meet somebody and we start to talk, it's very clear one person is on the halachic dimension, one person is on the ethical dimension, and one person is on the Chaim HaPnimiim. And that means one looks at the different characters from an archetypal perspective as not only an historical character, to the degree that that the Bible is historical, and the question of the historicity of the Bible, of course, is something people have been discussing ever since official Bible studies began. So from this approach, we don't really focus on the law. We don't focus on ethics, although we may here and there. We don't even focus much on, is this part of the Bible factually true? How far back can we trust this part of the Bible to actually discuss things happening in those days? Those are all good questions, but it's not our core question. Our core question is the inner life dimension, which means how does this text speak to us? How does this text speak to our inner lives? And then number two, how do we bring our inner lives to the text? So, for example, a person might open the Bible and say, Genesis 15, looking at now, because I want to discuss that, people will say, there's no historical evidence that Abraham ever existed. We'll call that an historical approach, which more or less stops the conversation right there. From an inner life approach, says it doesn't matter because we have a text. So we have a literary text in front of us, in many places a quite brilliant literary text, clearly put together with great intentionality by authors in a place and in a time. Not only that, we're not going to talk about this today, several authors in several different places of times. In fact, we've gotten to know them by their nicknames. The J author who uses Yahweh for God, the E author who uses Elohim for God, the priestly dimension, the Deuteronomic dimension, the editorial dimension. Many students and professors make entire lives of studying the documentary hypothesis, JEPD, etc. I was introduced to it. I know it. I can teach it. Not my interest. So my interest follows, and then I would say the community developed around this is starts with the idea of the canon, C-A-N-O-N. And the canon starts with what is the text we have in our hands. However the text got here, whether it's historical or not, whether it's composed of many, many traditions or not, what is the text that we have in our hand? How is the text woven together? Whoever wove the text together, they wove it together intentionally. And then a fourth dimension, fourth and fifth dimensions, very, very connected. Fourth dimension is the archetypal psychological. As I look at a character, I realize, while it may be an historical character or not, the character carries within it psychological depth, which means when I look at the character, I discover something about myself. When I look at the character, I see something of the human condition. So archetypal characters, as it were, set out a psychological archetype under which many, many people may find themselves. Now, I find that each of the great archetypes, either characters or moments in the Bible, some speak to me more than others. As I study Bible with many people, and of course many of you have had this experience where one person's dominant archetype, favorite character in the Bible that speaks to them and through them the most, might not be someone else's. So that's roughly what I mean by archetypal psychology. We can talk about that more. And then there's what I would call the philosophic dimension, which is very connected to the psychological dimension. And the philosophical dimension has to do with what we will call philosophic anthropology. Big words for something simple, the study of the human condition. Meaning, as we study this text with its archetypal characters, we are studying not what happened then, but rather what happens all the time. Some people call this the mythic approach, M-Y-T-H, And again, myth does not mean fables. Myth means an orienting story that tells about things in another time, meaning symbols, narratives, etc., but that speak for all times. I want to jump forward to Genesis chapter 15 and move quickly to our Torah portion. So, of course, and we've spoken to Abraham, I think, at depth as an archetype the past few weeks, but just to review a little bit, one of our archetypes of Abraham is the unsettled person, the person without a religion, the person without a home, a person who does not feel that he needs to be where he is. Now, many people today feel the exact same thing. I don't feel a religion. I don't feel the weight of the ancestors upon me. I don't feel particularly locked into the place that I've been, although I might go back there. In fact, I watched a few minutes of a TV show before I bailed because I didn't see it had a future, where the people are on a ship. I think the show was called 1899. I got 15 minutes through it, where they're all looking at the dining room and someone here. Everybody here is running from something. Well, as soon as I heard that, I realized, okay, I've seen probably 25 movies that began with that theme, so I'm not very hopeful here. But Abraham is one of those 25 peoples on the deck of a ship going from England to America and either going towards something or running from something. So that's part of Avraham. We have the Midrashic Avraham, who breaks the idols of his father, meaning he's done with that old religion. And that's how many people begin. Counseling a young man recently who feels very terrible. He's born in a very traditional family. His father, brothers, everybody is very connected to a synagogue. He says, it just doesn't speak to me. I feel very uncomfortable there. My Jewish upbringing has felt traumatic. He said, when I went looking for a religion, I ended up in a Buddhist temple. He said, I don't know if I believe that, but I believe it a lot more than I believe in the synagogue where I grew up. And he says, I feel huge guilt. So as you can imagine, I'm thinking, boy, do I have an archetype for you. So, of course, we spoke a little bit about Abraham. I said, you sound like the founder of our tradition. The fact that with what works for them, what doesn't work for you, may be that you are channeling the founder of what they're doing. And he actually did not know a lot about the archetypal understanding of the Bible. So he did not feel confident to have that discussion, but he had a sense. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not disloyal. I'm not damaged goods. There's an archetype in me, which is the archetype that drew Abraham, according to the Midrash, to break the idols. I said, don't break anything. Abraham broke the idols back in his father's idol shop and went to a different place. I said, as far as you go, you might just join your local Reform or Conservative synagogue, which he said his family would find to be terrible. But I said, if you only go that far, nicha, it's probably going to be okay. I said, I truly, as a rabbi, I hope you find your way out of the Buddhist temple into something local and familiar. But I said, if I'm going to counsel you, I can't have an end goal in mind. But there you go. There is an Abraham archetype. So, and then he has a vision that I want to pull apart a little bit in Genesis 15. I don't think we've ever discussed it, so we'll be patient a few moments as we go. Genesis chapter 15. Abraham, some kind of a vision. He has a dream where he's finally able to speak out his main concern to God. God has chosen him. God has led him from his family, from his land, his father's home, the place where he grew up, out here. Things have not gone well. Things have not gone stable. Finally, the word of God comes to Avraham and says to Avraham, it says in verse 1, Haya devar Adonai el Avram b'machazeh. A chazon is a vision, b'machazeh. Lemor saying, Al tira Avram. Al tira Avram. Do not fear. Now, the do not fear, I think here means don't fear that something bad will happen to you, because bad things will happen to Abraham. Don't fear means, in my mind, don't fear your life is purposeless. Don't fear your life is meaningless. Don't fear that all of this is for nothing. You will go through tough times. Just know that it has meaning. Just know that there's purpose. Just know that you as a human being will unfold during these tough times Don't fear emptiness. Don't fear meaninglessness. Your life has meaning. Al tira Avram, Anochi magen lach. I'm a shield for you, which is why in our standing prayers we have the 1 through 19 prayers, each known by the last lines, the so-called chatima, the signature. The signature of the first bracha is Magen Avraham v'Sarah, Ezrat Sarah. Some simply say Magen Avraham v'Sarah, which is our version. But this is where God, as it were, reveals God's self to Avram, Magen Avraham. Anochi Magen lach, Sacharcha harbe ma'od. Your reward will be very great. And Avraham responds, Vayomer Avraham, Adonai Elohim, I hope it would be so, but I'm going through life without an error. I'm going through life, and the word he uses close to the Hebrew word for sterile. He says, I have no error. And it looks like my main servant, Ben Domestic Eliezer, will be the inheritor of my house. The man dies, his main servant inherits him. And then he goes even forward, a challenge to God. Henli lo natata zera, vine ben beti yoreshoti. A steward of my home is going to inherit me. The word of God comes to him and says, that one will not inherit you. Only one who comes from within you shall you inherit you. And then God takes Avram outside and says, gaze now upon the heavens and upon the stars, if you're able to count them. So shall your offspring be. And Avram trusted God, and he reckoned it as a righteous. Now, we don't know exactly what that means, but it's some kind of a just reward or some kind of reliable promise or something like that. By the way, I want to give you a little bit of a midrash here. The midrash here when it says in Hebrew, Vayetze oto achutza, he brought him outside. The rabbinic commentary says he took Abraham above the stars. So try to imagine, in the old days, they believed that all the celestial bodies operated on a sphere. There was the sphere of the moon, the sphere of the sun, the sphere of the planets, and the sphere of the stars. The stars all existed, they were of different sizes, but they existed on a plane, on a spherical plane. And then above that was the heavenly heavens, was the place of the world of light and the place of the pleroma, as it is called. So Avraham, God lifts Avraham above the plane of the stars, and what this has meant for the rabbis is, at that moment, Jews were relieved of the power of astrology. It's a fascinating idea. Now, I remember I would playfully look at my astrological sign when I was a kid, getting the Long Beach Independent. I would, now and then say, "What's my astrology for today?" And it always looked like the next person's astrology, but it was fun. And then there were people that I knew that really believed in it. They discovered their star sign, and they went to weekends, and they were very convinced that life down here was a function of the energy that came from higher worlds. Then I was in high school, studied some Judaism, and I discovered Jews don't believe in astrology. Now, that doesn't mean Jewish individuals don't believe in astrology, but officially speaking, we give no power to astrology. We respect the idea that there is a realm of the stars, the zodiac, the constellations, and so forth. That's real. It doesn't have any power. If you're ever wondering why Jewish belief says we are above the stars, this is the source here. He took them above the stars and says, the stars don't have any power on you. This is going to be something that's going to go beyond the astrological. So God says, verse 7, I am God who brought you out of Ur Kasdim to give this land to you. And then Avram says, how will I know? And then we have a strange part where it seems like the entire taxonomy of ancient sacrifices, not just one sacrifice, but you might say predicting the sacrifices that will be in the temple, which is the heifer, the goat, the ram, the turtle dove, and young dove. So I'm almost predicting forward to run the gamut, as it were, of the different sacrifices. They're all cut down the middle, and then in the middle there is a path. He took them, he cut them at the center, and placed each the opposite of the other. Praise of descent came down upon the carcasses. Avram drove them away. The sun was set. A deep sleep fell upon him. A great darkness fell upon him. We don't know what this means. From my perspective, and by the way, somebody else might know. I may have read enough to know that nobody knows for sure what it means. It might be some great ancient shamanistic principle that you cut up the taxonomy of animals, and you go into a deep sleep and have some deep shamanistic transcendent experience. This sounds to me to be very atavistic, a residue from some much more ancient tradition. A great darkness fell upon him. And then, you might say, he gets a deeper vision of God. Know with certainty that your offspring shall be aliens in a land not their own. So we look in verse 13. It says, Ger yihiyeh zaracha be'eres lo lahem. They will be aliens in a strange land, a ger. But the nation they will serve, I will judge. And afterwards, they will leave with great wealth. As for you, you will come to your ancestors in peace, buried in good old age. And a fourth generation shall return there. And it says, the iniquity of the Amorites shall not be full, which means when the current nations fill the land with their iniquity, the Israelites will drive them out. This, to me, seems one of those passages where the Bible is trying to make sense of why it is the people who live in Canaan have to leave Canaan, and partly because the iniquity of the local inhabitants has become too great. The sun was set. On that day, a covenant was made with Abraham. To your descendants I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, and tells the various nations that are living there. Now, why do I share this with you? Because we're going to study Hagar, and Hagar is one of the people in the Bible, aside from this, in the book of Genesis, has some of the greatest visions of God in the Bible. And the question is, why Hagar? From a literary perspective, who put Hagar in the Bible? For what purpose? What role does she play? And how does Hagar address our lives? Well, we meet Hagar immediately in the next chapter. Sarai, his wife, bore him no children. So we know that Avraham is sterile, that Sarai can't bear children, or the two of them, or just one of them. We don't know. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. Now, I am not the first person, not of many people before me who noticed the relationship between the word Hagar, the stranger, and Hagar. This is a very clear, it seems to me, a very clear motif that Hagar, who is an Egyptian, she's now an Egyptian who's Hagar, who is the one who dwells among the Israelites, and soon we will be Gerim in the land of Egypt. So you may say it's something of a prefiguration of what's going to happen later. So now we have to look at Hagar with a little more attention, because Hagar stands for us. Hagar stands for us. Hagar stands for the future generations of Abraham and Sarah a few hundred years hence. Sarai says to Abraham, I'm restrained from bearing children. Consort with my maidservant. Perhaps I will be built through her. And he heeded to her voice. Hagar becomes Abraham's concubine, for lack of a better term. Going from the English, he consorted with Hagar. She conceived. This tells us that whatever infertility the couple had, it was Abraham, it was not with Abraham. And she conceived, and when Sarah saw that she had conceived, Sarah was lowered in the eyes of Sarah. Sarah felt lowered in the eyes of Hagar. And I mentioned last time, I believe this is a pure accepting the projection, which means the way I feel is the way that you feel about me. I just want to share everybody right now, just put a pin in this. When you ever say that somebody feels something about you and you don't have overwhelming evidence, just assume you made it up for now until you go find evidence. If you ever say that somebody made you feel bad about yourself, pause it and assume that you made yourself bad about yourself. Your life will go a lot better In many ways, if you take responsibility for your feelings, I'm just giving a little commercial for my Wisdom Works class, until you get more information. Until you get more information, I have responsibility for my own feelings. So a source text for this is right here. Sarah says, I feel diminished in Hagar's eyes. That may have nothing to do with Hagar. In any case, she says to Avram, the outrage against me is due to you. It was I that gave you to her. And when she saw that she conceived, I felt low. I felt bad. So this is what I would call an unevolved human being. So by the way, one archetype that I have of Sarah is the unevolved human being, the person who blames their emotions on another person. Let God judge between me and you. Now it's become personal. It's also a very fascinating archetypal image that even though Sarah's resentment is toward Hagar because Hagar became pregnant and Sarah can't bear children, and it is Sarah who gave Hagar to Abraham, of course, by the force of association, because Hagar and Avram are associated, and by Avram, Hagar became pregnant. Now she says, there's a problem between you and me, and God will judge it. And Sarai then dealt harshly with Hagar, and Hagar fled into the desert, probably going closer to her home in Egypt. An angel of God found her by the spring of water in the desert and said, Hagar, maidservant of Sarai, where are you going? And she says, I'm running from Sarai. He says, return to your mistress and submit to her. We don't know why. And the angel says, I will greatly increase your offspring, etc. And the angel more or less saves her and returns her. And then we have this absolutely stunning moment in the Bible, Genesis chapter 16, verse 13. It says, the name of Adonai who spoke to her, and she called. Hagar called the name of Adonai. You are the God of vision. And this is in verse 13. Genesis chapter 16, verse 13, if you want to look it up. It says, Vatikra Shem Adonai Hadover Eleha. She called the name of Adonai, speaking to her, Ata El Roi, you are the one who sees me, Amra. Hagam Halom Ra'iti Acharai Ro'eh. You are the God who sees me. Could I have seen him after his seeing me? And then she calls the well of the living one appearing to me. This is in verse 14. So she says, yes, Be'er Lachai Rui, the well of the living one who sees me. Now, the reason I want to stay here is that the Bible has clearly decided to give a lot of attention to Hagar in this experience of the God whom she experiences, who sees her when she's in this moment of great distress. Now, this can be a prefiguration of what happens further on with the Israelites. In fact, I think it is. But I want to go back to this one archetypal moment. And this is very much based on my studies of Jung this past week, about the connection between Hagar and Jung. Now, when Jung talks about the sexual relationships, the archetypal relationships between men and women, I would have to say today, in today's ethos, we of course don't only mean what we're going to call traditionally gendered males and females. I don't have a stake in any of that. All I'm saying is every person who lives, whether they're male, female, go from male to female, change their genders, fluid gendered, non-gendered, from my perspective, it doesn't matter which, archetypes live in people nonetheless. Every one of us has archetypes living in it. And the archetypes living you does not matter where you land on the gender spectrum. I remember, and I very vividly, the day that I remembered that Rivka is the dominant archetype in me. And when I questioned it, I thought to myself, well, men should only have male archetypes. I consider myself a heterosexual man. And therefore, women should have women archetypes. And when I discovered that both Rebecca and Rachel were the strongest archetypes in me, I realized for myself, talk about with many people, and realized these kinds of archetypes are archetypes that might appear in any person, in any gender, or lack thereof. So when I say male, female, it is not about how we talk about it in these postmodern terms. It's really about what's happening in the Bible. In the Bible, Hagar is presented as a woman. Sarah is presented as a woman. Sarah is also presented as a wife. And so Jung talks about this. And he talks about where, and again, this is a little bit odd, while Abraham does follow God's directions, it seems that Sarah is the one that in follow God's directions has to do what we're going to call the one true thing, the one difficult thing. Okay? Now, the one true thing, the one difficult thing, for all of her defense, as it were, meaning Hagar made me feel bad, you're making me feel bad. Sarah did a tough thing. That boy grew up in that camp, and whether she didn't like the boy or not, she knew what it meant to divest a child of his tribal identity. She says the boy has to go, and she has to go. We don't know if as seriously as later, but we want to try to think of the archetype not just of the person, but of the wife who says it. Because I think the fact that she was a wife has some meaning as well. So first of all, the covenant with Abraham, she's now become a fully part of the covenant, and she feels in place. She feels the duty to protect the covenant in a way that Abraham doesn't seem to feel. And you'll see this also in the book of Kings, when there actually is a civil war between those who claim David's throne. So the rationale of Sarah, who now has become the main bearer of the covenant, and her ability to do something that's going to hurt other people. In fact, I just had recently a conversation with a man younger than me, who's taken the reins of a fairly large Jewish organization, and he shared to me, I want to be the rabbi of yes. I want people to know that all their feelings will be valued. I'll say, allow me from the voice of experience. You can't say yes to everybody. You'll have to say yes to about half the people. So when you say I'm the rabbi of yes, you're setting yourself and you're setting up everybody up for a failure. One thing you need to know is you will disappoint people. And your job in disappointing people is to reason your way through it. To say, I might not be able to do what everybody wants. That's impossible. But I can give my reasons. And if you like the fact that I'm a reasoning person, you're welcome. But if you don't like it, that you don't get your way, then obviously there's a certain point where you will not be able to survive in the leadership of this organization. So I saw a young man come with great enthusiasm, but I saw him setting himself up for an archetype that was not Sarah. Because the Sarah archetype leader will sometimes say, I can't say yes to everybody. I will have to say no to you. I'd like to reason with you why. What you're going to do next is going to be your decision. I think every good leader not only has to do that, but has to know to feel right doing it. And in my mind, how do you do it? Go back to Sarah. Go back to what Sarah was feeling. I must protect my son, Isaac. I must protect my son. That's a little bit later. But even in the willingness to say, this is not going to work out, you're already looking down on me. Whether I'm feeling it and making it up or whether you're doing it, whatever it is, it's not going to end well. This is Sarah. And I think she's a valid archetype that many times people don't want to feel that archetype because people don't want to, people always want to be nice. They never want to have to do the decisive thing. They never want to make people feel bad. Well, leaders aren't able to do that. If anybody can ever point to any leader who's never had those things, please tell me right away. I love to read about that person. But anybody who's authentically led anything that matters knows this Sarah archetype. Now we're going to look at the other archetype. We see the sexual relationship between Abraham and the concubine. When you read about the archetypes of men, the concubine oftentimes is the fantasy of the male. There's something of the male, again, using this terminology, of the man and the wife that gets stale, Because as you know, throughout human history, relationships have been work relationships, have been division of labor, have been trying to survive in the tribe or in the hamlet. People say it was a patriarchal tradition. When I just look at my parents' marriage, one I know the best, my Mirav's parents' marriage, our marriage of my siblings, of my cousins, I don't know one marriage that's what's called patriarchal. I don't know one. Now, it could be that I just have a small aperture. Every marriage that I know of, just about every marriage at which I've officiated has been some kind of a team where two people have joined their resources together to do things such as bear a family, raise a family, protect the family, create some kind of prosperity, find a neighborhood, figure out who's going to do the work. As I look at all of them, whatever troubles happens, it's not about there's a patriarch dominating a woman. There might be a bossy one and there might be the compliant one. It's not predictably that the man is the bossy one and the woman is the compliant one. So I'm just not buying. Now, again, it could be that my view is too limited. I'm not buying the idea that human relationships have always had this patriarchal male dominance to it. It just hasn't been in what I see. However, what I have seen among people in marriages is the fantasy of the non-marriage. And the fantasy of the non-marriage is the sexual other. It could be for the husband, it could be for the wife, where all the encumbrances of marriage are not in place. You might say the marriage on vacation, where all there is the love and the intimacy and the sex. So in archetypal psychology, there is the image of the concubine. There is the image of the concubine. Men and women have the fantasy. It seems more men than women, but it is real. And one fantasy that Hagar might be playing out is the fantasy of the concubine. Again, I don't know why it's in the Bible, if I am at all right. Therefore, what Sarah finds objectionable here is not only the problem with succession, but also with the problem of the male having the actual fantasy of the concubine living in his life. And why is that? Because it is inherently disruptive. As a fantasy, when you see it in a movie or a person wonders what it would like to have the unencumbered sexual relationship versus the actual work of what it means to create life and intimacy and work and honor over decades. I've said many, many times, you don't really know what this thing is. You don't know what this road is until you've done it a few decades. And the miracles of having this, the solid two-person commitment over decades, there's a mystery and a beauty that you only know later. Not everybody knows the beauty of it. Not everybody thinks it's beautiful. But there is a mystery and a beauty that's only becomes apparent in the decades, and sometimes it's in the, as I think we're experiencing, it's in the third decade. So the concubine archetype is real. It's here. Sarah doesn't want it. You might say that Abraham's archetype is, I'm just a victim of history, something of a Dr. Zhivago type, meaning I know God spoke to me. Since then, I don't have a lot to say. There are forces greater than me that are running this thing. Hagar, interestingly, has the same kind of archetype, which means I was brought into this for a reason, and I'm taken out for a reason. None of it has been my choice. So the similarity in the what we'll call the anima animus of Hagar and Abraham is, I have no control. I have no choice. I barely have freedom. Now, that's one thing that I think, as I'm thinking about them archetypally, that links them together. They're not like God. They're not like Sarah. They're not like Yitzchak. They're not like Ishma'el. They're more like each other. And Abraham is told that his descendants will become a ger. She is Hagar. Remember, Moses calls himself ger ha'iti ben eretz nochriah. I was a stranger in a strange land. So what I want to develop is a little bit idea of looking at these relationships, not as just as interesting relationships, but speaking archetypally that different people in life feel themselves to be one or the other. Now, as we move a little bit forward in this, we come to the second great moment of Hagar in Genesis 21. And this is actually, of course, when Isaac is born. And now we have the different archetype coming in. I'll speak about this very briefly. And that Isaac being born in a how shall I call it? A family plagued by some kind of trauma. The trauma of insecurity in the land. They've already experienced drought. The trauma of the devastation of Sodom Amorah is not talked about here, but remember there is a local place that was completely destroyed by a volcano or God's wrath, have it as you will. Abraham already fought a war in Genesis 14, a bitter war between the 4 and 5 kings. This is not a safe place. The whole time Sarah has been barren. Hagar and Ishma'el are still there. So I try to imagine in this place of war, drought, famine, sorrow, disaster, and ongoing animosity in the camp, Sarah finally has a baby. And she names the baby Yitzchak, which means laughter. She names the baby laughter. If your name is Isaac and you want to know what your name means, it means laughter. Now this goes back, of course, to when the angel said to Sarah, you're going to have a baby, and she laughed. And the angel said, did you just laugh at me? And Sarah says, no, I didn't laugh at you. And the angel says, yeah, I know you laughed. It's a very strange little discussion in the Bible. But I think what it does for the reader is this name means laughter. And there's the laughter of derision. There's the laughter of surprise. There's the laughter of happiness. But Sarah laughs. And the idea that laughter is finally born in the tribe and they have a party and Isaac is weaned, that's something that has some archetypal value as well. But then it takes a darker turn after the birth of Isaac. And Abraham, it says in chapter 21, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Sarah said, God made laughter for me. Whoever hears will laugh for me. And she said, who is the one who said to Abraham, Sarah would nurse children, for I've born a son in his old age. The child was weaned. Abraham made a great feast on that day. That's up to chapter 8. Chapter 9, the first thing that happens, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who had been born to Abraham. What does your English translation say? Chapter 9, last word. Okay. Here's what the Hebrew says. She saw him mitzachek. Mitzachek. Now, your translation might say laughing, which would be close to the original. Here mine says mocking, because this Bible is already taking the side of God, at least their image of God. Mitzachek is used later on in the Bible of having a kind of an orgy, people just laughing riotously. You'll find this in the molten calf incident. We really don't know what mitzachek means in context. In simplest context, it means giggling. It means laughing. It means horsing around. We're not sure what it means. Sarah sees it as a very bad thing. I have a friend in rabbinical school who said this refers to sibling sexual abuse. I don't know. He made a case for it. We have no idea what it means. It was serious enough that Sarah said you have to banish Hagar and Ishma'el. And again, we're finding this archetype be reborn. Again, just to identify with it, you think your life is going a certain way, and suddenly somebody says, we're firing you, or I'm leaving you, or this is going to happen, or some other thing, and you realize you're powerless over your life. And you look at the 5 basic needs that Abraham Glasser talks about. Survival, which means just feeling that you have what you need to survive through life. You belong to somebody belongs to you. You have some kind of relationships of belonging. Glasser says we all need power, the power to shape our environment. Glasser says we all need the freedom from others, meaning that they shape, that we're just not a device used to shape their environment. And number 5, Glasser calls fun. I say fun meaning pleasure, depth, whatever it is that gives your life some added dimension. These are the 5 things that Glasser talks about. But a core one is power. And Glasser says, when one of these is important to you and it's denied you, the natural response is rage and fury. Okay? If someone comes to try to take my house away and impinges upon my survival, I'll get upset. Someone tries to take my job away. Someone tries to hurt me making a living, I'll get upset. If somebody who I think belongs to me no longer belongs to me, I'll get upset. Somebody tries to take somebody from me, I'll get upset. If I have no more power to shape my life, I find myself impotent in life, I'll get upset. Same thing with freedom. If someone's bulldozing over me, I'll get upset. And as far as fun, if you make me late to my jujitsu class, you're going to feel some jujitsu. Okay, I'm being facetious here, but my favorite ironic metaphor here is the person who falls into a rage because someone made them late for their yoga class. Okay, I love that image. But if someone has something fun and you stop them, make them late to the beach, to the class, whatever it is they do, you'll say, wow, you got so mad, what's up? And the answer is, it's the only thing I like doing and you're stopping me from doing it. I'm giving a little bit of an animadversion, but Glasser, I think, is very convincing here. And if you can't rage and if you can't get it back, what Glasser says is you depress. If I realize I'm going to lose everything and there's no one to be angry at, you fall into a depression. If someone for whom you long is taken from you, either they leave or some other thing, and anger is not going to do anything, you depress. If you realize you have no power over life, that other people will decide your life and there's nothing you can do, Glasser says you depress. If you have no freedom, if someone just takes away your freedom, your latitude, you depress. And if someone takes away that which gives meaning to your life, joy to your life, you depress. So from Glasser's perspective, you have your 5 needs. There might be more. These are convenient. Name them how you want. You can put the interpretation on them. If they are denied you, you go through hurt and then to anger. And if you can't get anger, you go to depression. And so therefore, if you look at yourself, like archetypally, which of these 5, has it been hurt or denied you? And then you look at yourself. Where am I on the anger, depression spectrum? Okay, now that's as far as Glasser takes it. Of course, from a spiritual perspective, we look at the aftermath of all of that and say, okay, now that I'm sitting here, angry and depressed, is that it? I know it's been taken from me. I know my survival is threatened. I know I lost a relationship that I dearly love. I know my power over life seems to have been thwarted. I know that I'm not free from the power of others. The things I love to do, I've stopped. Depression, anger, anxiety, a whole host of ego self-disruptions. A lot of the work that I do, and again, this is a commercial for wisdom work, is when people discover themselves here. And I want to hear their story. The story, I'll say 8 times out of 10, is this exact story. It's the Glasser story. It's the Hagar story. It's the Abraham story. 8 times out of 10 is this story. So my question is, what now? My question is, now that you're here, is this the end of your life? Do you go to the grave in this mode? Or is there the human choice that says, well, that was then, this is now, and as difficult as it is, what do I do to move myself to the next thing? The Yetzer Hara and the unconscious ego self can't even imagine going forward because they feel dead. And so this is why I call this the resurrection of the dead, because you say, okay, some part of my life died. Some part of my life died when one of those things happened. But I'm a human being with a mind and a soul and a free will and a vision. And we go through the process one by one of, as it were, activating each of these circuits, my mind, my soul, my free will, my vision, my will, my skill. You just have to engage all of these parts of yourself, and you start moving toward somewhere else. I just want to share another little piece of counseling with you. Another young man I counseled who was working in the family business and realized into his 30s that he absolutely hated it. It was soul-killing. He had enough money to take a break. And he said to me, I know I need to do something. I had 2 failed relationships with women. I don't want to work there anymore. I don't know who I am. I don't know what to do with the rest of my life. He says, I am completely stuck. So you can imagine, like, every system has failed. And the depression almost, sitting across from this young man, the depression almost felt infectious. Like, I thought I was going to catch it. I mean, he was so dour and almost dissociated and lost. And I'm looking at him, and I really thought, is this where I refer? Because I felt so beyond my capacity to use spiritual psychology and wisdom work. So I just said, I tried to grok his soul, and I could see the pain and the emptiness and the darkness. And I said, is there one thing you love to do? He says, well, I like playing music, but I can't make any money at it. Okay, so notice the voice already came in. I said, well, what if you could make money at it? What if you were the new John Lennon or Paul McCartney? He goes, yeah, but I know I'm not. I said, but if you were? He said, I know I'm not. I said, okay, so how do you know? How many songs have you written? He says, I haven't written any songs. I said, explain why. He says, well, I just never sat down and wrote songs because I know I'm bad. You can imagine this. I mean, every person here can imagine what to say, right? And I had to think of the gentlest ways to say it, because everything I said, the resistance came in which is, I can't survive this. I have no power over I don't belong to anybody. I've lost 2 girlfriends because I'm so depressed and anxious. I have no control, no power, and nothing's fun. And the resistance wants it to be that way. And so I was able to very, very gently to pull out the following. I'll share it with you because you might find it instructive. I said, let's agree that you are on vacation. You are on a 30-day vacation. So you don't have to do anything productive on vacation. I said, do you deserve a vacation? Yeah, I got 30 days. I said, do you have enough money to survive a vacation? He says, more than that. I've saved, so I can probably take a year to figure myself out. I said, 30 days. I said, now, what's fun? He almost whispered, playing my guitar. I said, okay, so here, I said, if I may, 2 hours every day, a chair, a table, guitar stand, guitar, little amp. All you do is play your guitar, write down a couple of notes if you want to, play others people's music, but the main thing is show up to that little place. I said, do you have one? He said, yeah. I said, I need to share with you something. The problem is not your mother, your father, the job, the women that left you. The problem is resistance. The problem is the Yetzer Hara that has discovered you in this utterly abject moment and wants you to stay there. He says, why? I said, it's not time for that why, but it's true. Your fight is with the Yetzer Hara. Your fight is with the Yetzer Hara who says, stay there depressed. Stay confused. Don't do anything. Live a wasted life. And how do I know that there are wasted lives? Because I've done their funerals. So I know where this ends. I know where this ends. I know where it can end. Because I've buried those people. I told him that. And I said, I don't want that to be you. It probably won't be I'll be gone long before you will, but some person in my place is going to say, what a wasted life. I says, here's where you need to learn something. The way out of procrastination, depression, etc. is the following. I know it's highly sexist. It works for me. Calendar is king, clock is queen. Calendar is king, clock is queen. Calendar is king, meaning you put it in the calendar and it's no longer yours. You've given it to the emperor. You've committed. If my reveille says 5:30, then it's reveille, and I don't ask myself again because it's the king owns it, the king of the universe. as it were, if I'm having a real struggle getting my day together, that's God's power that says you got to get yourself going today or you're going to waste your life. The calendar is king. Okay? I'm sorry, what I'd give it doing a day. Clock is queen. Calendar is how I structure my week. Clock is how I structure my day. And I shared with him, I want you to work on your guitar 5 days a week, 4 days a week in a row, and I want you to tell me when. And I was pretty bossy because he needed a boss. I felt, and I was wondering if this person would ever, who wants to come back to this, right? Who wants to come back to someone being bossy? And so I let it go. I mean, I chase people a bit and then chase them, and it was the day before. I forget when this was. He says, "Aren't we meeting tomorrow?" And I said, "If you want to, sure." And he came in, and folks, his affect was different. He looked like a different person. Just the way he sat and his eyes and his skin. And I said, "How's it going?" He says, "Well, I'm not getting much writing done." I said, "Do you have your corner?" "Yeah, but not at the same time every day." It was all defeated. I said, "Wait a minute. Are you at your music corner?" He said, "Yes." "How many days a week?" 5 days a week. At a given time? "No, sometimes it's 9, sometimes 10, sometimes 11, sometimes it's night." And I wanted to say a mishberach. I truly wanted to say a shechechianu. That he fought his Yetzer Hara. He fought his Yetzer Hara. And he won. And then I said to him, this is going to be an incremental fight. Incremental fight, but you need to take the fight to the Yetzer Hara. He says, "But I still don't have a job, and I don't have this, and I don't have that." I said, that doesn't matter, because what matters is the Yetzer Hara. Because if you don't know how to fight the Yetzer Hara, nothing else matters. So in my archetype of Abraham and my archetype of Hagar is, on the William Glasser, what was it? Forgetting what it's called, the William Glasser model. They should be depressed. So she's driven out. Now what happens? She's driven out to the well. She's so depressed. I think a perfect example of the Glasser model gone completely awry. She wants to die. And she's projected this onto her son, and he should die. If this is how things are, if people just get mad at you and destroy your life, "Oh, I don't like you anymore, I'll destroy your life. I don't like that kid anymore, I'll destroy his life too." I mean, there are people like that. There are people that all you have to do is cross, and they'll say, "Oh, then I'll just destroy your life." Maybe you've been there. I've been there. God hears the cry. An angel of God calls Hagar and says, "What troubles you? Fear not, for God heeds the cry in his present state." This is one of the most powerful lines in the Bible that I know many of you love, and I want everyone to love this line of the Bible for when you need it. It says, "Ki shama Elohim el kol hana'ar ba'asher hu sham." Ki shama Elohim et kol hana'ar ba'asher hu sham. Because God has heard the voice of the young man, ba'asher hu sham, in that he is right there. I don't know another way to translate it. Because he's in the final moment of despair, where he's the guy standing at the cliff down in San Pedro when I was 17 who wrote the note, "The Why is the Reason." I wish I could have been there. Maybe I could have said something. But there was no angel that stopped and said to that young man who committed suicide when I was a kid, who wrote a note left on the cliffs over San Pedro, "The Why is the Reason." Maybe Ishma'el, and again I'm expanding on the archetype, maybe Ishma'el is getting ready to write "The Why is the Reason." Maybe Hagar is getting ready to write "The Why is the Reason." I don't understand this world. I don't understand the cruelty of this world. And the angel comes and says, "Arise, lift up the youth, put your hand on him. I'll make a great nation of him." From this utter depression, under a little tree in the desert where there's no water. And this now single mother has dragged her kid out to the desert, put him under a tree, sits, and an angel lifts them up and says, it's going to be great. You can't imagine how great it's going to become. Right? And at that moment, she opens her eyes. She perceives the water. She filled the skin with water, and she gave the youth to drink. I mean, this is a moment of complete transformation, of being dead and being revived. God was with the youth. He grew up. He dwelt in the desert, became an archer, lived in Paran, and his mother took him back home to Egypt, apparently, at least for a time being, to find a wife. All right, so for me, when I'm looking at these two anecdotes, back in chapter 16, here in verse 21, Abraham standing at the side. Of course, when we looked at the Akedah, 22, you can almost see why the Akedah has to be, from my perspective, Abraham acting out of complete depression, guilt, and despair. If God didn't told Abraham to kill Isaac, Abraham would have done it on his own. He's so, and this is my interpretation, he's so filled with self-loathing, such loathing of God, such loathing of Sarah. Shame that Isaac still exists. When I look at the psychological state, the spiritual psychological state of Avram, the archetypal state of Avram, that next morning in Genesis 22, I'd have to take an entire full day to talk about it. Maybe Sherry and I can discuss this next Rosh Hashanah. Sherry, put a pin in that, because this might be worthy of our discussion. So that's from last week's Torah portion, or 2 times ago Torah portion, and now the denouement of all this is in our Torah portion, which is why I chose this theme for the very, very meager lines in our Torah portion, which are, I know you're all ahead of me, Genesis chapter 25. Vayosef Avraham vayikach isha ushma Keturah. Abraham continued, and he took for himself a woman whose name was Keturah, incense woman. And the Talmud says, as I said in my Shabbat thought, Keturah zo Hagar. Keturah zo Hagar. Turn this from a great biblical story to a magnificent biblical story. Because what does he do after all of this? He looks her up on Facebook, finds her, sends her a message. Yeah, this really is my Facebook page. It's not a fake. Says, can we meet up? They meet up, and they look at each other. And again, in my recreation of them, they remember the archetype of the powerless. They look at each other and realize they've gone through a terrible, terrible tragedy. And they're the only ones on the place of the earth who could marry each other. Nobody could know that pain but each of those people. Abraham and Hagar reconstituting their relationship is one of the deepest, most tragic, most beautiful love stories on every perspective imaginable. Of course, now to link it to the beginning of the Torah portion with the cave at Machpelah, Abraham dies. And then look at verse 9. His sons Isaac and Ishma'el buried him in the cave of Machpelah. So if Ishma'el and Hagar had gone down to Egypt, they're back. Enough that they're living close by enough, Avram and Hagar, and we're going to assume, and Isaac, Avram, Hagar, and Isaac's living nearby, and Hagar and Ishma'el, they're all within a walk of each other. Yitzchak and Ishmael get together and bury Isaac. I would have loved to heard that eulogy. I think I'm going to write it. I'd love to hear Hagar say, let me talk to you about the man whose concubine I was, and then the man I married. And then she finishes her eulogy. And Ishmael says, I want to talk about my father and the way my father kicked me out of the house once, and we came back, and kicked me out to die, and I didn't see him for many, many years. I want to tell you what my relation with him is like. I'm going to have to talk about my stepmother. And then Isaac gets up. I'd like to talk about my father, Abraham, who tried to kill me, and tried to kill this guy, my half-brother, whom I love more than anybody. And I want to tell you about my being without a mother until my dad married Hagar again. And thank you, Hagar, for taking my dad back. Because my dad, Ishma'el's dad, your husband, tried to kill the two of us and tried to kill you. And you forgave him and loved him, and we love him, and we're doing his funeral. So whatever life means, right here, right now, this means something. And then after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, and here's the denouement. Isaac settled near Be'er Lahai Roi, back in Genesis where Hagar lives. Isaac picks up and moves back to live with Hagar. Now remember, since almost all of the story of Chayei is about Rebecca, Rebecca lives with Hagar. So in my imaginary midrash on Rebecca, the main thing that happens here, why all this happened, Hagar becomes the mother of Rebecca. Hagar becomes the mother of Rebecca, and then everything that follows makes sense.